And thank you very much for joining us here on PM Express tonight. Tonight, we continue with the Agyapa Royalties Saga on the back of the press conference that the minority addressed today. A host of civil society organizations, 16 in all, came together and put forward their views, asking a series of questions to the government as far as the Agyapa Royalties Saga is concerned. Tonight, we're going to try and get some answers to these questions. We started yesterday with the Information Minister. We're going to have 1 hour now to break it down, get to hear the civil society's concerns, and get some answers, hopefully from government, to these questions that they have raised. So stay with me. I want to quickly track for you how far this has come, this debate. If you're just joining us and you haven't heard anything of Agyapa, the Agyapa controversy, it really relates to our mineral royalties, and government simply want to mortgage that for some upfront money between 500 and 750 million, so they could use that for development, which is really has at the center of the controversy. The question is, what is the best way to get that done? Government has chosen to set up a special purpose vehicle, which has become a subject of controversy for many reasons, right? The 16 civil society organizations are kicking against this particular deal. But what really are their concerns? What is at the heart of the issues that the civil society guys are raising? Lack of transparency is one of the things they mention. They're also demanding, they're calling for broader stakeholder consultations to relook at the deal. Is one of the key concerns that they've raised as well. As part of the concerns, they say though that they've cited a call for an expression of interest placed in the Daily Graphic just last week, inviting prospective consultants for the development of a strategic plan for the Minerals Investment Fund. Now, this, they say, is the way to go, and that the previous process that led to the selection of Agyapa, for example, information wasn't transparent enough, but also fundamentally raised questions about, if you're about to develop a strategic plan, how then do you go forward with the plans to set up a special purpose vehicle to raise funds and sell shares, etc. Now, they want same openness, they say, cannot be said of the creation of the special purpose vehicle in the Agyapa deal and the appointment of its directors, which they question. Now, it says significant questions about the deal still remain unanswered. What are these key questions? Questioning why Agyapa was selected through an uncompetitive process is a key question that you're asking. But is that the case? Was there a competitive process? We have heard very little about the process that led to these the outcomes that we've seen that have become very controversial. Tonight we'll attempt to get some clarifications on what the processes were. They also question why an entity without a corporate strategy and approved funding plans can raise $1 billion and give $500 million to the government in such an indecent deal, they claim, especially when there is no known emergency to warrant such a rush. So a host of questions that we're going to go through with the civil society, try and get some clarity from their point of view, but most importantly, get some of the basic points also clarified from government's point of view for us tonight. Stay with me. After the break, my guests will join me. Joining me tonight is the head of the Africa Center for Energy Policy, Mr. Benjamin Boakye, is in the studio with me. Joining me via Zoom right now is Charles Edubahin, who is a Deputy Finance Minister. Mr. Edubahin, thank you for your time here on PMSS. I hope you're doing well tonight.
I'm doing great, and thanks for having me. And good evening to your listeners.
Great. Let's start with a quick update on the process, on the Agyapa process. Since Parliament went on that recess on the final day when the deal was approved by the House, has anything moved since then in terms of the process to get the Agyapa the mineral royalties management issues really on the road. What has happened since that night?
What do you mean by has anything moved? I don't understand.
What has happened since Parliament approved the deal in the House just before Parliament rose?
We submitted documents to Parliament for approval. These are transaction agreements. And so we are ongoing with the work to do with the transaction, including completing the prospectus, which is the main item now that is being worked on.
And then quick clarification also that I'll need, as far as the amendment to the MMIF is concerned, the minority had raised concerns that that amendment itself has not been passed, has not been signed by the president. Has that happened since?
You mean it's not been assented to?
By the president, yes. Has that happened?
I believe it is with the president at the moment. I don't know if he's actually signed it yet.
Okay. So we don't have an update on that yet. I mean, because that would have been a good place to sort of appreciate where we are with the processes. So we are developing the prospectus now for the investors as far as this is concerned. Now, let's come to the concerns that civil society has raised. I want to start with the key concern they've raised. And now that you're designing the prospectus, I guess it's the right time to ask the question about what is our dividend policy?
The dividend policy is determined by the board, so you cannot determine that up front. So that is something that would be determined by the board of Agyapa once it's been set up. However, typically, royalty companies pay dividends anywhere between 1% and 4%. Some of them don't pay dividends at all, but typically some of them pay dividends. So it is anywhere between 1% and 4%. If you're a royalties company and you pay above 3%, that is really worth noting. If I may quote, there are two big royalty companies, including that the one is called Wheaton, and the other one is called Franco-Nevada. And dividend yield as of for Wheaton and Franco-Nevada was 0.7 and 0.8% respectively in 2020. In 2021, it is projected to be 0.7% for Franco-Nevada and 1% for Wheaton. So that just gives you an idea of what the dividend yields are for these companies.
Okay. As of now, we don't know ours yet because you're waiting for the board of the MMIF to make that decision.
No, not the board of MMIF, the board of Agyapa.
Board of Agyapa to make that decision.
I mean, I'm sure you're aware that companies determine the dividend policy based on the year's profitability, and that is a decision the board makes once they look at the profitability.
Okay. Do we have any clarity on the process to put that board together? Where are we with that?
Yes, we have, according to the MDF Act, there are two automatic positions on that board that are for MDF. So two of MDF's board members are automatic representatives of MDF, and by that fact, the government on the board of Agyapa. For now, it is the CEO, Honorable Yalba, and a lady lawyer, Felicia Ashley, who is on the board of MDF, who have been seconded or will be on the board of Agyapa. In addition to that, there's one independent, Mr. Tutu Ajari, who has also been identified. Over 2 years ago, we had the services of an international headhunting firm by the name Conferry to assist us in identifying not only board members, but suitable people to fill in all the key positions within Agyapa. This has been a very extensive, long, drawn-out process that started in 2018, in fact, late 2017, when we announced it in the budget, and got to work through a procurement process to engage the services of a transaction advisor and lawyers to be able to help us design the structure of this entity and how best it will work which led to the drafting of the Minerals Income Investment Fund Act, which was presented to Parliament and went through a very rigorous process, and leading to the passing of that act somewhere late 2018, and on the back of which we then moved to the next step to start designing the other vehicles that would have had to put in place to ensure that we could bring this transaction to fruition.
Okay. I have with me Benjamin Boachi, who heads the Africa Center for Energy Policy, one of the civil society groups that today had asked a series of questions. One of the fundamental questions, Ben, you've asked is the dividend policy. He's explained that in the process of determining that the board will do so once it's put together, but they're looking at anything between 1% to 4%. Does that offer any clarity?
Yeah, I mean, it gives us an understanding what government is thinking, or Agyapa is thinking as far as dividend payment is concerned. But again, it really raises the fundamental question that we are now ceding 49, almost, I mean, thereabout. We're not sure yet because the conversation keeps shifting. Shares to the market, but we don't, the people of Ghana don't have that decision on how much that structure will work, right? So it is going to be in the hands of Agyapa, which is the supposed 900%, but it's going to be, infused with the private interest or the market interest, So that decision is not going to be solely in our hands into the future, right? And that is where we think that if such a decision was to be made, broader consultations would have been made.
Okay, so the decision as to what actually will be the dividend policy?
The structure, this choice of investment for our mineral royalty would have been made. I heard the minister saying that broad consultations were made, a rigorous process was undertaken, and that is where we differ with our press release and the engagement that we had. First of all, the act, the MDF Act, was a surprise on us, civil society and relevant stakeholders. And if you ask who was consulted, they tell you Parliament, the Ministry of Finance, and the Finance Committee did a thorough, analysis of it. But the point we are making is this: we shouldn't reduce governance to only the elected, right? It's like that when you're having a major policy decision, such as selling shares in our royalty stake, it is just the government or just the elected community that have that conversation around it. You need to broaden the conversation to bring relevant stakeholders in. And that's where governance becomes important, because there are various stakes, in here where communities are involved, where the royalty is actually coming from. We have a pact with them, right? Over the period, we have told the communities that we'll give them up to 20% for them to share with relevant state institutions. They were promised that that money wasn't enough, and therefore it was going to be increased to 30%. In reality, as we speak today, what goes to the community is about 6-7% from central government because of the capping and realignment law that was passed. So if there is a policy that fundamentally defines what goes to the communities for the rest of the life of the mine, it is not a simple conversation between Parliament and Ministry of Finance. It has to be broad. It has to examine the pact that government has with the people on how we intend utilizing mineral royalty into the future.
On that point of consultation, so Sapon Kroma, the information minister yesterday on the show, said that he quoted from the act itself, out of which this is all flowing, and says that, and read from the act, and says that in the act, provision that the board, the fund itself, were given the authority to use means such as a special purpose vehicle to manage the royalties. And that process that led to the act being passed was a consultative one.
But today, Mr. Pankuma said on your show that government doesn't need to engage civil society. They can educate us when we have a problem. You understand? So that is the mindset that is driving this kind of conversation. So government has decided not to engage anybody beyond the elected community. And that is fundamentally, flawed in a democracy where you have different interests, different stakeholders. What we do is policy. What Imani does is policy. What ISODEC does is policy. So government is saying that we should close shop because we are not relevant, in that space. And it's problematic for us in this conversation because we are ceding, our interest to a company to manage on the assumption that it will be managed well to yield more returns. So when we are raising questions around that, and we think that we should have a broader conversation around the options that are available to us, we should have a broader conversation to answer questions on the governance structure of this kind of arrangement and vehicle. I think it's an important call
that we should all listen. Let me pull that to the Deputy Finance Minister because he has played a very key role in this very process. Mr. Dubois, so 16 civil society groups today pen their signature to this document. All of them play in this same area. Many of them, in fact, play in this same area. They all say they knew nothing about this until the brouhaha emerged in Parliament. Considering that this is a key national resource, we all have stakes in it, to restrict it to Parliament, they raise questions about that process in itself not being transparent enough. What's your reaction to that? What's government's position on this, on the consultation?
Evans, can you hear me?
I can hear you well, yes.
Excellent. I am rather surprised, that, there's so much brouhaha as at now. And I feel like there must be other reasons why all of a sudden this seems to be such a big issue. As I said, we started working on this transaction from 2017. We've repeatedly put it in our budget. We've said we'll do monetization of gold royalties. And this is a transaction that we intend to do to raise at the time was between $300 to $500 million. And that was primarily based on a conservative estimate that we gave ourselves because we knew that it would depend on the valuation that we got for the assets, and that was dependent on the gold price. In fact, by going through the whole drafting of the Minerals Income Investment Fund, which was submitted to Parliament, we had a bipartisan discussion. In fact, we went off-site. We spent a weekend at the place in Adal with both sides of the House fully in there, walked through the document clause by clause, line by line, to agree on it. These parliamentarians represent the people. All of them come from different constituencies, including constituencies that are in the mining areas. In fact, the chairman of the board of MIF, Duka, is from Takwa, and so, we have brought everybody along. Additionally, once that act was passed, it was assented to by the president, and it was gazetted for 21 days. So anybody could have read about it, and at that point, if civil society had some concerns, they could have raised.
Mr. Dubois, do I still have you on the line? I think I may have lost him briefly. If you can hear me.
And said, hey, please, by the way, what's going on? Sorry, why did you lose me?
Sorry, I lost you briefly, but I had a question on that point you just made about you started.
Sorry, where did you lose me? Sorry.
It was just a second. You just made a point about if civil society had a point, they could have raised it, and you've made that point. But my question.
Yeah, so let me just end, please.
Briefly, yes.
So I'm saying that, look, in fact, it's ironic that right now with all this brouhaha, civil society didn't even ask to engage with us at the Ministry of Finance. They go and just have a press conference and come up with all these points, clearly demonstrating that they don't really understand the transaction. And if they don't understand the transaction and they are not fully aware of the facts, why don't you come to us? Ben knows, I've engaged them severally on different matters. The Ministry of Finance has always consulted. We ask them to come in to help us or to give us ideas as how we can move forward. And so I know they know that, we are very, very, very comfortable working with them and making sure that we have a collaborative, collective partnership to move the country forward. After all, we are all here to do what is in the best interest of the country and Ghanaians.
You made a point that you started working on this since 2017. My question is, when you say that, are you saying that you started working on this deal and again, including engaging a special purpose vehicle, one of which is set up and registered in a tax haven in Jersey to manage our mineral resources? Were all these specifics part of what you've been working on since 2017?
You know, when we decided to do this transaction, in fact, the reason why this came about was that we were approached by investors who offered to come in and buy our royalties for a lump sum of money upfront. And we said, look, why should we sell the royalties to these investors when we could do this transaction ourselves? Because, you know, I'm sure you know, you're aware that both my boss and myself have a background from Wall Street, and so we are very aware of these type of transactions. And so on further inquiries, we realized that the objective of these investors was to acquire these royalties and by amassing royalties from various entities, be able to launch a royalty company that was listed. And so we said, look, if this is the case, and royalty companies have existed from time all over the world, we can do the same thing ourselves. And we have the capability to structure it and create a Pan-African entity that would be rival the likes of Franco-Nevada and Wheaton. The market cap of Franco-Nevada today is over $34 billion, just on the basis of royalty flows. So this is really a big transaction that, if done well, can really inure to the benefit of Ghanaians. So that was the idea. So now that we had decided that we could do this on our own, what do we do next? We said, okay, fine, let us go through a procurement process to engage a transaction advisor to help us advise us on the best way to structure this, to bring this idea to fruition. And that is what we did in 2018. Out of that consultative process came the decision that we needed to first set up an act, which would then empower an entity to which these royalties will be assigned, and other equity investments in our mining companies, to be able to then use that, to be able to then get that fund up and running. And then we said, okay, fine, next thing, where do we want to list this company if we wanted to go ahead? And the decision was that the Ghanaian Stock Exchange, unfortunately, was not deep enough to be able to accommodate a listing and a fundraising of this size. If you recollect, when MTN went to market, they wanted to sell 25% of their shares. They ended up only being able to sell about 12.5 and raised $240 million, whilst the target was over $500 million. So that gives you an idea of, and that was, I think, the largest IPO to date on the Ghanaian Stock Exchange. So that gives you an idea of the depth of our capital markets today. So then it was said, look, if we can't do it, where's their next logical jurisdiction to list such a vehicle where you have the depth and the variety of investors to make this a success? Because demand drives valuation. If you have a lot more investors interested in the story and want to buy shares, it pushes your valuation up, and you can make sure you maximize the value and the opportunity. So we looked around and we realized that gold assets typically trade in Canada and the Canadian Stock Exchange, London, and the US. And London was more attractive because there was no real. The last pure gold play on the London Stock Exchange was Barrick, which had gone into a merger and had since delisted. So there was an opportunity to, provide a new anti-royalty gold company on the exchange, which every investor, we thought, would like to have in their basket or in their portfolio. So that was the next decision. Then we said, okay, fine. If we want to list in London, what do we do? Where do we incorporate such that we can take advantage of the London Stock Exchange? And incorporating in London itself was not an option, because that would then subject these royalty flows to tax. And we didn't want to pay a tax on a tax, which will also then affect the valuation of the company. So we needed to find a tax-neutral domicilium that was also close to London, and that you found companies that were typically listed in London Stock Exchange are domiciled in. And that was the Jersey and the Channel Islands. Jersey and the Channel Islands has a lot of companies there that are incorporated and that are listed on the London Stock Exchange. And so we felt that this made a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, back to the question, Mr. Dubahin. So in all that you've just narrated, in this process of making all these very important decisions about mine and your royalties, what sort of consultations were you then making in making all these very critical decisions?
We go to the Eurobond markets every year, right? And we go and raise money for budgetary purposes, on the back of your taxes, which are used to pay. We go to Parliament and get approval for the transaction because it's an international transaction, and we go ahead and proceed to go on the roadshow, engage investment banks of international repute to advise us on the transaction. If you're saying that every transaction of this nature, we need to go back to stakeholders, inverted commas here, and consult with everybody before we go out there, then in a sense, you're saying that this mandate you've given to us is a conditional mandate because you don't trust that we'll do what is best in the interest of the Ghanaian people. And that's what we're trying to do.
Okay. No. Yeah, please hold on for me, Ben.
No, I think he has answered it, that it wasn't relevant to engage. And essentially, because he said that they engaged...
Please, Ben,
no, but, Honorable, but I think if you said you had the time to engage consultants and external parties, and for us, you know, because you do other transactions with us, and that is why I was highlighting, you know, the governance arrangement around royalty. It goes beyond the finance ministry deciding that they want to do something else. And I mentioned the pact that, you know, government has with the people on royalty, where we have an MDF Act, which is supposed to remit a component of the royalty to the communities. And a law has been passed to reduce that. And that significantly goes against the promise. And we have worked on this for almost 6 years now, trying to encourage government to have a structure similar to the Petroleum Revenue Management Act. There was a promise in the manifesto during our engagement with the government now that we need to do that. And it was promised to deliver that. So we have been watching out for the day when that promise will be delivered. So if there is a change of course and nobody want to engage us because Eurobond has been done before, different transactions have been done before, they are not the same. You know, it's a different transaction altogether. And that's why we're asking the questions now. What has happened to the other pact that you have, you know, with the people on mineral royalty? You know, and those are legitimate and relevant questions to ask, really. You know, if that pact wasn't relevant any longer, that conversation had to, you know, be transmitted to all the relevant stakeholders, and not to say that, you know, it's happened with other transactions and this has to go on a similar tangent.
Yeah, I mean, another quick thing I need to clarify with you, Mr. Dubai, since you're on. How much exactly are we seeking to raise from, I mean, floating these shares?
That depends on the valuation. Royalty companies trade as a multiple of net asset value. So you look at the royalty flows over the lifetime of the mines, you present value those flows and apply a multiple. That multiple ranges anywhere from 1.2 times to 2.0 times.
So, I mean, forgive me, Mr. Dubai, so what was the basis of the $1 billion valuation I saw in the contract Parliament approved?
That was the valuation that upon which the royalties were assigned to Agyapa by the Minerals Income Investment Fund. It is like stating your stated capital when you go and incorporate a company. You say your stated capital is 100 cedis, and then that is what you start the business with. Because Agyapa is a new entity that is now going to go to market. So it needed to have a balance sheet to start off with. And the balance sheet needed to state what its equity value was. That equity value was the value that MIF had ascribed to Agyapa in exchange for assignment of these royalty flows. So that is the sort of the basic incorporated value. But that is different from the market value, which will be determined during the IPO process by the interest we get and the bids that come in through a book building process. Okay,
but my fundamental question was how much we're seeking to raise. I asked that question also knowing that in Parliament, it was stated we're expecting to raise between $500 and $750 million.
Exactly. So the target is to do at least $500 million.
Okay.
The question is how much, what percentage of the company will we have to give up to get that money?
Well, what's the question? What's your answer to that question? Do we know that now?
Yeah, that may range anywhere from 30% to 49%, depending on the valuation.
I mean, what do you make of it?
But I think that's another confusion because Parliament has approved the agreement. That put value on the company that we're hoping to list. So if we're going to change the valuation, are we going to bring it back to Parliament for approval, or how does that happen? Because Parliament has approved the agreement. That values Agyapa at $1 billion. Okay, so if you're selling half of that, that is essentially 500 million of the company. So what happened? And these are the questions that we want answers to, because it is the royalties that are going to be used, to offset, that commitment on the market. So civil society want to understand these specific commitments, how this valuation actually happened. Last year, the big multinational companies paid royalty of 1 billion Ghana cedis. That was about $200 million. This year, with gold prices, moving up around $2,000, royalty could be in the range of $250 million, right? So on what basis did we do the valuation to put 75.6%?
Can I get answer to that question, because that is a fundamental question. Mr. Dubois, on what basis did we arrive at the $1 billion valuation?
First place, that is not true. Last year, I believe that the royalties was $133 million. So if you do the math, you will not get anything shy of $1 billion cedis as the flow. I think it was closer to about 650 million cedis. No. So I don't know where Ben is getting his number.
But isn't it true? But Ben, yes.
This is the publish what you pay payments from.
Mr. Dubois, please hold on as Ben refers to the document.
Publish what you pay payments from the big the Chamber of Mines, which actually states that royalty payment was 1 billion and 6 million. Yes, so 1.06 billion is what they paid to Ghana government in 2019.
Mr. Dubois, so, this is the chamber. This is the chamber of the mines itself saying that this is what it is.
It is in the budget. You see it in the budget. It says 650 million, unless maybe that does not capture.
That was 2018. That was 2018. That was 2018 value. 2019 is 1 billion.
2019 is 1 billion?
Yes.
No.
Yes. Here
no, I haven't seen that.
I mean, and just to verify this, because this is a program that is, I want it to be pretty factual. This is a Ghana Chamber of Mines, published what you pay 2019, and indeed confirms the figure of 1.006 billion.
It does?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll take your word for it.
And of course, I'll send you a copy. I mean, this is the publish what you pay from the Ghana Chamber of Mines. Of course, being as factual as I have seen it, does that change your answer to the question about how we came to the valuation of 1 billion?
No, at all. It does not. As I said, that the valuation of 1 billion is a nominal value that is given to these royalty flows that are assigned to Agyapa. The actual market value would be determined during the IPO. And we believe that the actual market value would be actually closer to 2 billion, at least north of 1.5 billion by the time of valuation. And that is just by simply looking at comparable transactions and similar royalty companies and what they trade at. It's as simple as that. To answer the question about if we are going to go back to Parliament, we said in the documents, and if you read the agreements, it's there clearly that these royalties have been assigned to Agyapa for a consideration of 1 billion, meaning that this is what will be captured on the balance sheet to start off the company with as the value, the equity value or the asset value to date, before we go at list. Also, in fact, the reason why the number I have may be slightly different from yours is because my number is based on the 16 particular mines and their royalty flows that are being assigned to Agyapa. It's not all the mining companies that are producing whose revenue or royalties are included in this. It's some specific assets, 12 of which are producing and 4 of which are in development phase. And that is why there may be a difference between what we are doing. But so the assignment, the value of the revenue from the royalties of the mining companies that are assigned to Agyapa for 2019 was $133 million.
Ben, does that offer clarity?
No, it doesn't. And I think another clarification, I mean, when you say that it's not all the companies that have been assigned to this deal, essentially the big companies that actually contribute to royalty. So 95% of our royalty comes from these companies. The companies that are not part of this is the bauxite company and the consolidated diamonds. So those companies don't really generate much royalty. So essentially, the royalty pot is being given to these companies. The producing giants and exploration companies are all part of the assigned companies. So I think that clarification is important so that Ghanaians know that, I mean, the meat of the royalty is gone. It's not, the ones left are not big players in this sector. I think that clarification is important.
I don't like the use of the word "gone," as if it is something that we have.
No, I wanted us to clarify the point we're making, that it's not every royalty that is gone. But I mean, if you look at the companies that have been assigned to this transaction, it's really the companies that we are getting royalties from.
Ben, I agree with you on that point, that we do have in here the reputable companies with the track record, because that is what we will sell. You have the brand names that are worldwide, internationally, mining companies that have assets in Ghana but are recognized names worldwide. These are the assets that investors are very comfortable participating in because they know the companies and they know their track record. So it's logical for us to include those ones in this basket. But I think I wanted to point out the fact that the discrepancy or the difference in the numbers may be attributable to the fact that we are not including in here all total royalty flows from even non-mining, gold mining companies and the like. And that is essentially what I wanted to say.
Okay, and let's also give you an opportunity to clarify another central plank of the civil society question that they put forward. The one that has to do with the politically exposed persons, particularly the case of Mr. Kofi Osafo-Maafo. I want to understand the process that led to their selection to be part of this of the royalty call. Was this a competitive process, or they were handpicked?
It was a competitive process. As I said, we had a company by the name Conferry. Conferry is an internationally, globally recognized headhunting firm, and that went through a very rigorous process over several months, identifying professionals in the mining sector and who were shortlisted, interviewed by them, first phone interviews, and in some cases face-to-face interviews, and then they sent to us a shortlist. And in fact, what we had insisted upon was that ideally we would like to have a Ghanaian at the helm of affairs. But we also were cognizant of the fact that to be able to, we needed to make sure that whoever it is was well qualified, had the right credentials, had a track record and experience in mining and gold, and so could be able to really steer this company and give investors the confidence that they will need to be able to invest in such an entity.
Okay.
So Conferry, in a summary, Conferry was engaged to do the whole recruiting process, not only for all the positions, but even for the board members.
So you say the Conferry came forward with a shortlist. Was, for example, Kofi Osafo-Maafo the only Ghanaian on that shortlist?
No, there were a few of them, yes.
So I guess my question is, on that shortlist, what process led to the selection of Kofi Osafo-Maafo as the person who ultimately gets the job?
The fact that he was one of the, I think he was the only one who had actual direct experience as a research analyst and an investment manager in gold mining and in the energy sector. He's had 25 years of experience on the investment banking and asset management side, but more specifically, 18 of those years have been covering gold mining and energy stocks. And so he really understands what the investor is looking for, what they would like to see, and how to package and sell this opportunity.
I mean, Ben,
essentially, he used to be working on the side of the investors, and we brought him over on this side to now be able to help ourselves.
So he's provided clarity that this was a competitive process. An international headhunting agency had done it, shortlisted. Of course, then after the process, Kofi Osafo-Maafo and others who we know have been doing the work were shortlisted. Does that address your concerns of the process towards the selection of these people?
No, I think this clarification is very important because, I mean, we don't care who is actually leading the organization and the company, because it has to be somebody delivering, somebody competent delivering the job. But the process of selection is really important.
Happy with the explanation he's given.
I'm coming at that. Especially when, you know, you have politically exposed person, you know, coming to lead it. It has to be so transparent. And this is the first time we are hearing this clarification. I mean, on this your show yesterday, you saw the banter that made it was difficult for the information minister to actually clarify how the process went. So I will take his word for it, and then we will see how that goes. But that is important to ensure that into the future, people can appreciate that process. And that is important also for the sustainability of decisions around Agyapa Royalties.
I mean, so Mr. Dubai, let's address quickly in the last few minutes I have, the question about the tax haven has come up. Ben, you had concerns with this as well. The whole process of setting up the special purpose vehicle and then letting it be a foreign company in a tax haven. What were the concerns that you had in civil society?
No, I mean, countries have been fighting, you know, shell companies, company hiding in low tax regimes, trying to avoid paying taxes. And it is all right for anybody to register in a tax haven as an individual. But for a country to lead that, we thought it was quite problematic. Because then you are sending signals that citizens can also do the same. Because if you go on a list on a stock exchange, and I know that it's royalty that we're going to use for Agyapa to invest, I can decide to close shop and go and buy into a company that doesn't really pay tax. You know, so you don't want to see government patronizing such schemes, you know, where companies are trying to avoid tax. So it may be legal, but morally, government has to think about it, because countries have been fighting corporations and companies who are hiding away from paying tax. And our concern really is that now you have government leading these kind of establishments, you know, setting up companies in low tax regimes, you know, just to avoid paying tax. You know, so that's really our concern, and we thought that morally, it's not an example that you want to see government set.
Mr. Dubai, a direct question to you: will or will it not pay taxes to Ghana, Agyapa Royalties?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Great. First and foremost, royalties in itself are a tax. Royalties are a tax on the mining companies, but it is a tax that is taken off the top of the revenue. You know, just as an aside, you know, government automatically gets a 10% equity stake in all these mines as soon as you set up. However, you should ask how many of these companies declare a profit in order for government, and then declare a dividend for government to be able to even see any return on their equity stakes. Very few of them, if any at all. So if it wasn't for the fact that we had these royalty flows off the top, we really will not see any value in these equity shareholdings that we have. So this tax helps us to participate in the operations of these mining companies. Now, once it comes in as a tax, it goes, or it used to go into the consolidated fund, just like all other tax revenue that GRA collects. The question was that if we now take it through a company that is incorporated in a country that has income tax laws that are applicable, then, for example, if let's say $100 came into this company as royalty taxes, and then let's say they spent 20% of that on operational costs and investments, and so you had $80 left, 80 cedis left. Then a tax, let's say a 25% tax rate is now applied on the 80 cedis. Your income will come down from 80 to whatever, a quarter of that, to 60. So you have 60, which you now will then have to distribute to your shareholders. Whereas if we were in a tax neutral haven, we'll have the full 80 to be able to distribute to our shareholders. What does that mean? It means that if I'm a shareholder, I'll place a higher value on the company that can give me all the 80 cedis in dividends, if required, than the one that will be limited to only 60 cedis. And also, in a tax neutral haven, I will not have the problem of a double taxation being applied. So essentially, it is either you take your tax up front, or you get a higher value on your company, and that allows you to be able to raise a much larger amount of money upfront for fewer shares. So it was a simple analysis. I appreciate the analysis or the point Ben makes about, setting the right example and a moral issue. But, like everything in life, things are done for a purpose. They can be used for good things and they can be used for bad things. We choose to use a tax haven for good things. We're not using it to hide anything or for money laundering. We are using it to come up with the most tax-efficient structure to inure to the benefit of Ghanaians.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate that tax havens have earned a bad name through WikiLeaks and a couple of issues, but they are mainly because of individuals and their way they abuse the system. It's rare that you see corporate entities and so forth make that mistake, because the anti-money laundering rules and all the requirements are so stringent, especially and if you want to list on the London Stock Exchange, that you don't even dream of trying to do anything onto it with using one of these tax havens.
Yeah, let me ask you then.
So it's a balancing act.
Yeah, let me ask you then. So Agyapa Royalties, eventually, you're hoping will be managing anything between $500 to $750 million when you float the shares. What is it that they're going to use that money for?
Okay, they would not be managing 500. Most of that money would come back to government, because government is the shareholder, or back to MIF, should I say?
Yeah.
Because MIF is the shareholder. So they would be paid most of that money. Agyapa will retain a portion.
What portion? What portion? Do we know?
And we haven't determined it yet, but I'll presume depending on how much you raise, between 20 to 25% of that amount.
And when they retain that amount, what would they use that for? What they have to invest it, correct?
They'll use that to invest in new mines coming up, and also to acquire additional royalty streams from various other entities all over Africa.
And then the remainder of the shares.
The whole essence of royalty companies is a way for mining companies in an exploration and development phase to be able to obtain investment or funding, capital expenditures to bring the mine to production in exchange for future royalty flows. So it is a source of funding for some mines that have prospected and confirmed the resource base, but need financing to bring the mine to production, to be able to get money to do that, usually cheaper than what the banks will lend you out. Yeah. But the royalty companies do that in exchange for royalty flows once the mine is up.
Yeah, I mean, because of time, I need to ask this very important question. On the back of the former president, leader of the opposition, saying that he will not respect the contract if he wins power, this clearly increases the risk and exposes us to all manner of further heightening risk on the market. It may be at a higher cost to us. Civil society says, on the back of all that, it is wise to pull the brakes and wait and consult more and get this addressed locally. Will government do that, or you so press ahead in the wake of all this controversy?
People unfortunately are politicizing a deal that we are trying to do for the benefit of all Ghanaians.
Yeah.
And we believe that the investor base knows our track record. They have been the same investors who have given us unprecedented success in our Eurobond issues. They've given us debt at the cheapest rates. They believe in us. They believe in our competence. They believe in our ability to structure these transactions. So I don't think they'll be deterred by the opposition and the utterances in their attempts to be able to discredit and derail what has unprecedented transaction.
Mr. Dubai, thank you. 30 seconds to you as we wrap up on that last point there, because that's a key point I saw in this as well.
No, I think it's important that the government stop listening to opposition and listen to what the citizens are also saying, because we're left out. It was a conversation between the opposition and parliament.
You're not getting a consultation. I think that one is very clear. Government is pressing ahead.
Well, that's the point I'm making. Yeah. So if they consulted the opposition, then it's time to consult the citizens, because we do understand what they're doing. And they have to bring it home and tell us why this option and why not any other option.
Have you been convinced?
That conversation is really important.
Have you been convinced, yes or no? Are you convinced?
No, there's a lot of issues to still raise, absolutely. Okay. And we'll hope to be engaged on these things. Yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'm grateful for your time. Enjoy the rest of your evening.